It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. However, what it really comes down to is whether the answers that you're giving them and whether the stories that you're sharing with them is actually better than the stories that your competition is telling them, right? Like you're being graded on a relative basis. When it comes to the investment banking behavioral interviews, there are two primary things that we typically see candidates struggle with, okay? Because the nature of the behavioral interview is that it's much more open-ended, right? You can't just go look at an answer key and say, oh, the answer to this question is, this, or if I just say these things, then that's going to get me the job. It doesn't really work that way, right? Everybody is going to have different answers when it comes, even for the exact same questions. Like, for example, tell me about yourself. Like, your story is going to be different from someone else's story, right? And so where we see people really struggle is how to deal with that ambiguity of, well, what do the bankers want to hear exactly? Like, what are they looking for, right? And so really what you have to understand is, obviously there's no like exact right or wrong answer that you can just give them. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. However, what it really comes down to is whether the answers that you're giving them and whether the stories that you're sharing with them is actually better than the stories that your competition is telling them, right? Like you're being graded on a relative basis. And so the first thing that we see students struggle with a lot is they know how they're going to answer these questions or how they want to answer these questions, but they don't really know how their competition is answering these questions. So in other words, they don't really know, they have no certainty that their answers will actually make them stand out, right? Because they don't know how they stack up against the competition. So that's the first challenge. Just think about it. If you ask yourself, like, whether you know how most of your competition is answering these questions, chances are you probably don't know, right? Because you haven't interviewed all of your competition before. The second thing that we see people struggle with a lot is, let's say you realize how you stack up against competition. Maybe, out of 10 people, you're better than 5 out of the 10 people, or maybe you're better than 7 out of the 10 people, right? The second step is you're going to have to actually figure out how you can get to a 9 or a 10, right? You want to be number one in the group. Just given how selective and how competitive it is to get into investment banking, you have to be the best, right? Being a 5 or a 7 out of 10 is probably not going to be good enough, right? So the second challenge we see people struggle with is, like, what do I actually do to improve my answers, even if I know that there's room for improvement? And a lot of times people feel like, I know my answers are okay, but they could probably be better. I just don't know how to actually make it better, because that's why these are my answers, and I can't really critique my own answers, right? So the way to work around this is you need someone, ideally, who has interviewed a lot of different candidates. I'm not talking about just, maybe an upperclassman that's gone through the process one time before you, and they know how they answer these questions, or they know the answers that work for them. That might be slightly helpful, but their answers aren't going to be the same as your answers, and what worked for them may or may not work for you, right? What you really want to do is have a large sample size. So like, if you have someone who's seen hundreds of different candidates answer these questions, maybe they've interviewed a lot of people, or maybe they've worked with a lot of students that are trying to get in banking, and that way they have a lot of data around what answers actually work and what answers don't, right? What are all the commonalities between people who actually got these jobs? And then that way you can identify all the elements that you need to include in the answers, and then you come up with a framework that you can then apply to the experiences that you actually have, right? So that's actually exactly how we do it with our own clients. Having seen over 200 students to date answering these questions, and having seen where they ended up, what kind of outcome they got, what kind of offers they were able to get, and then identifying, doing the pattern recognition on what all the best answers have in common, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, people really struggle with, like I said, figuring out how to improve their own answers, right? So again, you can't be the one to critique your own answers, because whatever mistakes you're currently making in your answers are probably in your blind spot. That's why you're making those mistakes, right? So again, you want someone who's seen a lot of these answers already from different people to point out for you and tell you what you need to change. Sometimes it's taking away parts of your answer that are unnecessary. Sometimes it's providing more detail and being more specific. Sometimes it's rearranging the order of how you're saying things, and sometimes it's using a totally different example altogether, right? But unless you have the experience to know what you need to change, you don't want to be the one to try to figure that out on your own, because then you're just guessing. Okay, so those are the two most common challenges that you should try to overcome as you think about how to improve your behavioral interview answers. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're looking for more customized advice that's tailored for your specific situation, then I invite you to book a free strategy session with our team at the link below. We'll talk to you soon.